In the Assassin's Creed series, the DLC tactics of Ubisoft have been pretty clear-cut in the past. There's usually one super premium DLC that costs big bucks, where Ubisoft have put all their time and effort, and sometimes there's also a bargain basement DLC, where Ubisoft may have spent 30 minutes of total man-hours into cobbling something together out of old rags and crap found under their desks. Benedict Arnold was the latter, and the Tyranny of King Washington is the former in AC3's case. And Tyranny is an odd duck in this franchise because it is the DLC that Ubisoft have put more time into than any other DLC combined as of that one. It's also episodic DLC for some reason and costs a grand total of $27 to $30 US. Keep in mind that for that price you are getting a package of content that's nearly 5 hours long, and I've seen full price games release with 5-hour campaigns, so make of it what you will at this point. The DLC is chopped up into 3 pieces that I believe Ubisoft had released at 3 different times as they were being developed as one full thing. I suppose the move was pushed to keep players invested in the game as long as possible with some usual multiplayer downloads you could get, or maybe people were just getting sick of Creed multiplayer at that point, I have no idea. I never hear anyone talk about this other than it's just an interesting idea. The DLC starts off as medias res, with Connor being dumped back into his home village with his still alive mom running away from wanton destruction. For an introduction, it was a strong opener, starting out with amnesia, coming on from the main game somewhere, and then being dumped into this parallel universe sight unseen. As we follow Mommy Dearest across the frontier, we see Concord and Lexington get obliterated by unseen forces. The people are getting menaced by bluecoats, and people keep troublingly mentioning George Washington in a negative light. There is no cohesive reality to cling to, as everything is changed, and Connor is just there to pick up the pieces after the world stops falling apart. It gets even better at the ending when everything falls into place by the appearance of King Washington holding a piece of Eden, where my what the fuck is going on meter just started going off the charts. King Washington is what would have happened if Adolf Hitler had mixed with some of those conspiracy theories about how Hitler wanted magical powers to become super overlord of the planet Earth. I like it because Washington is so unashamedly evil and doesn't even bother self-examining how much of a monster he's become. King Washington as a character has no self-awareness, but it's coming from the opposite direction, making him more powerful instead of more annoying. But at the basic level, King Washington happened because he wanted to make America a better place after picking up an Apple of Eden. Plus the classic Acton quote at the start kind of tips you off to how this happened. At this point, the game becomes the main game repeated, except Connor is fighting the Patriots instead of the British. Hell, at the end of the game, Connor is pushed onto the same side as the still alive loyalists that got left behind after evacuation day. What I like about the first episode of the DLC and most of this extra campaign is that it dives into more of the fantastical potential of the franchise that the main games usually sweep aside, with this whole dystopian parallel universe and Washington gaining so much of the Apple's powers to shape minds and crush enemies. And it makes for a very interesting premise and gives the player a lot of promise of ridiculousness that hooks them further into the story, which is what all good plots should aspire to do. But Ubisoft usually goes for the weaker plots in their games to focus on maintaining a stable level of boredom in their sandboxes. And if you want my truest opinion, the main game should have been like this DLC because the DLC cuts out a lot of the sandbox commutes and elements from the game so that it can focus on the campaign story. AC3 didn't have a lot of side quests, so this is the path it should have taken in development, and it worked out beautifully for Tyranny. In the first episode, Connor continues from the village getting obliterated and meets up with the rest of his tribe who survived to continue surviving in a Washington-ruled America. Connor is then instructed to go to the top of a mountain to obtain a magic potion that'll give him the strength to live in this new world. Yes, I'm being serious. The potion provides some new abilities to Connor exclusive to this DLC, and that was a good thing because they almost break the game in half. Connor will gain 3 new abilities for each of the episodes. One is Wolf Cloak, which allows Connor to become invisible for 30 or so seconds, Eagle Flight, which allows Connor to instantly teleport large distances, and Bear Might, which is simply a giant AoE attack that kills everything around Connor. The downside is that these abilities run off of Connor's health bar, which is almost infinite while out of combat, but has to be budgeted in combat due to how the regenerating health works. The abilities still work in Tyranny because the game has gotten a lot more challenging and more bullshit. That's because all the guards in the game are locked into level 3 notoriety, meaning that they'll attack Connor on the spot all the time, which makes getting around the sandboxes difficult since there are guards everywhere, and due to the high notoriety, Connor is just constantly getting dogpiled by large groups of enemies. It's not difficult to deal with, it just gets really irritating when you just want to sneak around and hit side quests and lock chests, and since the notoriety is locked to its highest level throughout the DLC, at least you don't have to worry about how many people you kill. However, the other side to this is that it makes the extra sync objectives nearly impossible to meet. The Tyranny DLC is essentially Assassin's Creed hard mode for those who want the extra quote-unquote challenge. Afterwards, Connor investigates a nearby scuffling arena for clues about his missing brother, quickly rescues him from a firing squad, and then leads the pair back to the clan's hideout, which Arnold found first. Connor returns to find that the rest of his village has been entirely slaughtered, and rather than simply survive, Connor sets his sight on Washington's sergeants to secure his own safety in the absence of the group's power-corrupted lunacy. Shortly after, Connor tracks down Benedict Arnold in Valley Forge, not an easy task if you aren't using easy mode Wolf Cloak, which due to the insane difficulty is nearly required at this point. Yeah, it's really annoying to deal with the higher difficulty without the animal abilities, but at least you get the crutch. I just don't like how the game is either baby easy or up your ass difficult. Plus there are dogs that are able to break Wolf Cloak, so there's that to look forward to, and the bait tool is so unintuitive to use that I basically just ran around the dogs and hoped for the best instead of doing that. Whatever, invisible your way around the barracks and you'll eventually find Arnold alone enough for Connor to kill him, and then get blindsided by Putnam, who, in spite of being one of the bigger dickheads in this DLC, decides to start taking prisoners back to Boston instead of killing people. Thankfully, the rest of the DLC doesn't have these monumentally stupid snowbanks that you have to trudge through anymore, and he'll be hitting the big city from here on out. Episode 2 starts out by Putnam offering Connor to Washington as part of a show of power where Washington is just going to massacre a random amount of people for no reason. Like I said earlier, he's basically Magic Hitler, and it's awesome. Connor escapes in the next 3 minutes and tries to leave with his captured brother, during which he jumps back into the spirit world to pick up Eagle Flight. The most useful of the 3 abilities, because the teleportation distance is insane, can be chained mid-flight without detection, and barely chops off any health. Plus you can use it for long-range assassinations. It is the best ability, completely broken. With it, Connor escapes and chases Ben Franklin, governor of Boston, but before Connor can assassinate him, he gets interrupted by a Deus Ex Machina Washington. After awakening, Connor gets dragged by his brother to be reintroduced to Sam Adams, the man orchestrating a 15-man rebellion against King Washington in Boston. The group is so amazingly underpowered that it barely counts as a poker game night. But with Connor there, they get the plan together to try and isolate Ben Franklin after learning about a little meeting of his down by the docks. There, Ben learns that Washington has decided to replace him with Mr. Putnam due to Franklin's inability to be a complete dickhead to everybody, whereupon Franklin was shot, dragged, and kidnapped back to the Adams safe house, and he begged for his life by offering his knowledge to Adams in order to take down the good old king. Franklin tells the rebels that he installed some sort of security device for Washington in New York, and all they'll need is a special type of iron from an old friend for Franklin to disable it. However, because of the general cruelty of New America, his blacksmith friend had to forge it into horseshoes to pay debts. Connor is then forced to infiltrate more barracks, murder all the soldiers there, and steal the supposed horse for Franklin's ultimate plan. And while that was happening, Adams' plan to escape through Boston Neck went horribly awry, as their blue coat sympathetic was quietly murdered and the plan discovered, leaving all of Connor's friends dead. It's a truly sad scene since they were so blindsided and outnumbered in their moment of demise. demise. Kind of weird that all these faceless dudes are helping out Washington to the point that they are now wearing the moniker of mockery that they used for the British only 3 years ago. The Redcoats have become the Bluecoats. Now that everything is falling apart, and with only the few options in Boston left, Connor takes down some local blues and dresses Franklin in one of their uniforms. Well, at least as best as he can manage. I mean, come on, Franklin, you seriously can't put on a tricorn correctly? At least Connor has one thing working in his favor, his knowledge of Old Man Faulkner, who just happens to be in Boston, along with his impounded ship. Connor then proceeds to invade the Bluecoat docks, kill everyone standing in his way, and free the Aquila for another run down memory lane. It would have been smooth sailing if it wasn't for another Deus Ex Machina, Putnam appearing on the docks and holding his brother hostage. Unfortunately for our cigar-toting ex-friend, Putnam didn't learn about Connor's new ability and was quickly assassinated using eagle flight. Episode 2 ends with the crew getting their sea legs and making it to the coast of New York, where they see a massive pyramid in the distance. It looks like the King's first 100 days aren't going quite as smoothly as he'd like if he was willing to build that thing in the middle of a burnt-out metropolis. The good thing for this DLC being so long is that it keeps throwing out new plot points and intrigues to keep gas on the fire. The episodes all know where they're going, but the path is filled with so many turns that it still manages to be a real amount of fun suspense, even with the focus of the time is spent on cutscenes rather than actual gameplay, which is good because the stealth aspects in this game are shit, and the story and characters are much more interesting to see on screen. While the last 2 episodes were quite good, the final one is where things start going even more off the rails. The new New York sandbox is absolutely dominated by the Washington Pyramid, making it a bit difficult to walk around the sandbox, and even more time-consuming. But you don't have to do it that often, and the new architecture is a new challenge to climb on, so it's not too much of a hassle, plus the eagle flight can do most of the work for you there. However, the episode doesn't start there. Connor was still out at sea at the end of the episode 2, and now must fight his way through an entire armada that Washington was using to blockade New York. Yep, you even get another ship combat section in the Tyranny DLC. Will wonders never cease? The DLC also continues being Creed hard mode by making the ships more agile and more intelligent, requiring more bracing and more tactical use of the limited cannons you have. Thankfully, the parts that are required to be beaten and that are scripted failures do make themselves moderately obvious so that you're still allowed to have fun beating difficulty without it becoming a horrible hurdle run. Plus, the moment where Connor smashes the Aquila into the Man-O-War is just fucking sweet. A great bit of gameplay-based storytelling there. With that, Connor manages to make it to New York just in time to acquire his final ability, in a dream world sequence that showed us that the spectacularly intricate design of Ico Team from the Shadow of the Colossus game will never truly be replicated in our short lives. Connor has the power! And his remaining friends decide to convene on the New York branch of the rebellion led by Thomas Jefferson, some guy with a pistol, and some regulars assaulting the Bluecoat HQ building. No one knows if they were literally out of options, but I wouldn't doubt it at this point. Connor gets into the fray, and like the Battle of West Point from the Benedict Arnold DLC, it's more copy-paste monotonous combat where you just mash the counterattack button if you were a big dummy and didn't realize what Connor has under his fingertips. Yep, this is the only time in the game this happens, so start mashing the bear might button. But not too much, because then it might kill you, and you have to save some of them to break down the pyramid gates and help Jefferson's incursion escape. Yeah, they kind of got counter-trapped by Washington there, and that was not too good of a spot to be in. The group retreats just in time to get a plan together. Washington has another of his dicks working for him in the streets, guarding the food stores. Mr. Fitzwilliams is their usual type of corrupt bastard, charging an arbitrary premium for the rationed food of New York. A system working so badly that half of the surviving population are literally starving to death until Connor runs up and presses one button to solve all their problems. Connor quickly deals his death, death and then heads off to recruit Fitzwilliam's cart driver to bring the food to the people. This is one of the more difficult escort missions in the franchise, since you have no idea where the enemies are coming from. They spawn in large groups, and the optional sync missions are high charge difficult. But with a clever use of eagle flight, I'm sure you clever clogs will work it out eventually. Afterwards, the game gets a bit more sandbox-ish, with the game demanding Connor create civil disobedience through side quests. These are really simple stuff, which requires Connor beat up someone or hang them with a rope dart, but while they are simple, getting to them is quite another problem, since all the guards in the city are still at level 3 notoriety, meaning a lot of random murder will be required, since you can only interact with the side quests when you are anonymous, kinda defeating the point of causing civil disobedience to complete the objective, when the streets are lined with dead bodies anyway, but whatever. I'm not the AI director, so what the hell do I know about this stuff? About halfway through, Connor is directed to attend a Washington speech at his pyramid, and if you thought I was being a little unfair with the whole Magic Hitler comparison before in this video, well, listen to this excerpt from the glorious leader of New America.
We are mastering vast armies. We are fashioning powerful armadas. We shall soon march upon our great dark enemy, England! We shall invade her shores and irrigate her fields with blood. English bones shall provide grist for our mills, and her people shall become our slaves. Each of you shall profit from the sweat of their labors. Our nation shall rise to its proper place as the greatest of all, the most sovereign kingdom, the United States of America!
Yeah, sounds like a real pleasant guy there. I like the moment for the game since it keeps reinforcing that King Washington is also king of the video game pricks. But could you do that at some other point when I'm trying to complete all the side quests? That'd be much appreciated. Thank you. Another thing I liked about this civil disobedience mission is that as you complete the objectives, the citizens become much more erratic and the guard population is down significantly to show the impact of your actions in the game, which is a thing that good sandboxes do when the narrative impacts the gameplay. Hopefully Ubisoft can learn to start putting that sort of stuff in the main game instead of just paying lip service to the idea of having a living, breathing sandbox by just sprinkling some unnecessary dialogue to its bastions of cardboard citizens. Cardboard, a national export of Ubisoft since 2007. Complete a few more tasks and the gauntlet will finally be thrown down. The citizens have had enough of the bluecoats and begin openly attacking them in the streets, allowing enough confusion for Connor to bash his way into the throne room and begin investigating his mother's infiltration of the pyramid to get the scepter in the first place. It's a decent part of the mission other than the part with the zoo where Connor is asked to not kill any of the zoo animals while investigating in their cages. Something that is freakishly difficult since the cages are really small, the animals' perception ranges are quite high, and all of the combat with the animals revolves around live or die QTEs, which I don't think you can do halfway, so how the hell were you supposed to not kill these things and save your own skin? Because you can't not be detected by the cheetahs and bears at all. Jeez, give me a break here, I don't even care about completionism. After a few minutes of that, Connor gets to the throne room and finds his way to ascend to the top of the pyramid and finally confront King Washington in an actual boss fight, no less. Yeah, I couldn't believe it either. It has like actual set piece design and stuff, like what those other video games have. Like the other time you encountered Washington and you need to use Wolf Cloak to sneak around his magic missile, and Eagle Flight to deal with his AoE attacks. The concept of a health bar kind of dies around this point, so it's not super duper challenging. Hell, I found it much more annoying dealing with Phase 2 where you have to run around failing to dodge undodgeable magic missiles while you use Bear Might on the corners of the stained glass roof to defeat King Washington. Tell me something, if King Washington is so great and so smart, why would he willingly stand in the middle of the ceiling which is made of glass? Glass is not a substance that can withstand a huge amount of force. I'm not the crazy one, right? Anyway, King Washington isn't totally out of glass after his 30-foot fall onto his back and creates an illusion of people Connor knows asking him not to take the apple. He doesn't listen, obviously, and breaks this illusionary timeline. Yep, it was a dream all along! In a lot of cases, this is a really cheap ending, but for the Tyranny of King Washington, which is so discordant with the reality of the game itself, it totally makes sense to do this, and is an ending that works. There's no way you could tie a what-if scenario into the canon of the franchise, so Dream completely makes sense. Plus, the entire plot was self-contained and fun to play in all steps, so it doesn't matter if they go for a cheap ending. Once returned to reality after both Connor and Washington touched the Apple of Eden and began that whole fantasy timeline, Washington gives up the apple, pleads for its disappearance, and begins advocating against America being a government for itself with a monarchy. He's absolutely terrified of it after seeing himself turn into such a monster, advocating war with anyone he could pick a fight with, and that's how the DLC ends. For a bunch of DLC missions costing $30 of player money, it was a rollicking good time from start to finish. It's just like how the Paper Mario trilogy was good. It has interesting levels and quests filled with fleshed out characters that make the good twists and turns in the plot that the audience likes to see. The fantastical elements brought on by the power of the Apple of Eden and the illusionary timeline really makes this DLC work because it gives something totally unique and intriguing apart from the franchise to play with. The Tyranny is such a solid story, with better cinematic design than the main game because it does cut away from being a sandbox game since it has sparse side quests and a lot of commuting otherwise. There's no reason for AC3 to be a sandbox, and the Tyranny DLC shows how much the main game would have improved if it had stopped that philosophy. The DLC is also very cutscene driven, but I don't mind it because the characters are interesting and the plot is suspenseful. You really don't know what's going to happen next as the Tyranny ups the magical and bizarre plot elements, characters with newfound powers, and the player gets handed some impressive and enjoyable new abilities from Connor's spiritual journeys. The Tyranny is an impressive bit of episodic DLC. That is one of the only cases in all the video games where the season pass for AC3 wouldn't have been a waste of money. A true romp from start to finish with everything that you could want from a piece of DLC. The ultimate question for you guys at home isn't whether or not the DLC is good. It's that, is the Tyranny of King Washington truly worth a grand total of $30 US for 5 hours of additional content? If the package was $20, it would be a no-brainer, but that line of 30 is a bit harder to defend. The product is definitely worthwhile, but I don't know if it's that worthwhile. At the very least, you should consider getting it because it is certainly something you don't see every day coming from the veins of AAA-built extra content. Hopefully we start seeing more of its kind in the coming days of the franchise because Ubisoft sure as shit will keep putting these things out with every release. So much for getting the full package with $60! AAA gaming, will you never cease to amaze with the lengths that you'll go for the money in my pocket?